what's one personal trait that you think most shaped your career?
If you're not passionate, then it's going to be very difficult to stay in science because there's a lot of failure. You have to be laser focused on your question. You have to have that stamina because there's a lot of uncertainty. But you also have to have a high level view on how the field is going and understand important discovery from the less important one. So the trait is really extraordinary curiosity, but also a lot of stamina.
Hello everyone, welcome back to the On the Last podcast. I'm your host, Arman Varma, and today's conversation is with someone who has reshaped the way we understand the human body at its most fundamental level. Miriam Merad is one of the world's leading immunologists and the founding director of the Precision Immunology Institute. Her research has transformed how we think about immune cells, but this episode isn't just about immune cells. It's about challenging scientific consensus, about intellectual courage, about leading through uncertainty, especially during moments like the COVID-19 pandemic, when the world needed answers from immunologists. Miriam, thank you so very much for taking the time to come on the show today.
Thank you for having me, Parma.
Right, perfect. To get started then, could you briefly describe your journey and background and how that has led you to where you now are?
Yeah, so I was first raised in Algeria. I was raised in Algeria in a family of physicians. A few years after the independence of Algeria, in a family that was very involved in building academic medicine. So my father was a cardiologist, my mother a toxicologist. I had an uncle who was a surgeon, another uncle who was a dermatologist, and I was raised in a family where was thinking about how you think about disease in a new country. And I suppose I saw this family serve, and that sense of service has probably shaped really my trajectory quite a bit. And so very early, I was attracted to medicine, and I started medical school in Algeria. Unfortunately, when I was in fourth year, there was a civil war in Algeria, and I left Algeria and I finished medicine in France. And in thinking about what type of specialty I was going to focus on, I was very interested in severe diseases. And at that time, and still now, cancer was this incurable disease, or at least at that time, cures were sparse in cancer. And I did a residency in oncology. And during this residency, the outcome of patients was very bleak. In the 1990s, you have a metastatic cancer. It was a death sentence. And this is where I became interested in exploring other type of therapeutic modalities. And I became interested in immunology, and I became interested in really understanding the immune system, how this could be used to treat cancer. And somehow I always thought that I would be a clinician, seeing patients every day, and this is not what happened at all. We can talk more about it.
Right. So you mentioned cancer, obviously. Was that sort of the moment, early on in your career that attracted you to the science? Like, what attracted you to science? Was it that cancer was like uncurable, or what was that initial attraction?
Yeah, it's exactly that. So first, as a clinician, as an oncologist, I was seeing all these patients first dying often, and also the traditional cancer treatment, which is chemotherapy and radiation, was quite toxic. So I was seeing a lot of toxicity and very little cure. And I started to read about all these treatments. Why were they that toxic, and why they were not that efficient? And in doing this, I decided to do a little bit of research on the side. And I remember looking at tumor lesions under a microscope. And I realized that cancer lesion that we will resect from patients was full of immune cells. And I was realizing that the immune system was recognizing that something was not going well in the body, and I started to read about that, what the immune system was recognizing. And I realized that there was a fight ongoing in these tumor lesions, and there was a beginning among, the immunology or the cancer immunology community of thinking how we can potentially harness that recognition and turn that immune system against cancer. But there were a lot of debate on, but, the immune system was unable to see it since the cancer was progressing. So there was all these questions that started to interest me in thinking about different type of therapeutics, beyond chemotherapy and radiation, that in my mind, very naively at that time, were not efficient enough.
Right. I mean, to the average person, they imagine scientists as purely rational thinkers. But how emotional has your journey through science actually been?
So, it's interesting, this vision that we have, scientists. We all imagine Einstein alone in front of a blackboard. This is not at all, the case. But first, it's a very social, job, because you are always surrounded by a group of people with whom you brainstorm and you think, and you also start reading a lot of work from colleagues of yours or peers, and you reach out to them and you debate. And so I was very touched by the fact that as a physician, I was really not successful in improving outcome of my patients. And in fact, I was very close to my patient. I was quite a good clinician, I think. And I was emotional about it. Yes, I think it was an emotional decision to go and explore other way of treating cancer. And then, of course, there's a lot of there's a lot of rigor in science. I often compare science to artists, because there is a degree of innovation and creativity that have to be part of a scientific journey. But there is all this rigor, which means that you have to understand the system. You have to read. You have to understand how this works. And this is how we are perceived as these very rational people. But my desire or my decision to go to science was an emotional decision out of all the bleakness that was surrounding me at that time.
That's very interesting. And throughout your career, I mean, what's one personal trait that you think most shaped your career and your journey?
Well, first, I think there is this curiosity. I'm quite passionate, about everything that I do, and I became very interested in these questions. Why we were so unsuccessful in improving the treatment of these patients. So passion is part of this, right? If you're not passionate, it's going to be very difficult to stay in science, because there's a lot of failure, In fact, most of the hypotheses that we have really don't succeed. And the other trait, which I tell my students all the time, maybe the one trait is stamina, right? An extraordinary focus on that question. And the question needs to be small initially, because it's very incremental, the changes that you can bring or the discovery that you make. So you have to be laser focused on your question. You have to have that stamina, because there is a lot of failure, a lot of uncertainty. But you also have to have a high-level view on how the field is going, So you have to be able to read and understand important discovery from the less important ones. All scientists claim that their discovery is major, like in other fields. And you have to have, so the trait is really, I think, extraordinary curiosity, but also a lot of stamina.
Right. And on the note of cancer, what's one major misunderstanding that the average person might have about cancer?
Yeah, so not only not only the lay public, but even scientists, we thought for a long time that cancer treatment need to be focused on the cancer cells. This was the cell that you needed to target with any type of therapeutics, chemotherapy or radiation. Then we realized that, in fact, the cancer cells indeed had this capacity to proliferate and expand and destroy your organ, but it was fed by surrounding cells, right? It had to be fed by vessels, it has to be fed. And we realized that immune system, initially trying potentially to restrict it, was also feeding cancer. And then this is how we started to be very interested in not targeting the cancer, but the surrounding cells that were contributing to cancer growth. Because in contrast to the cancer cells that are completely dysregulated, and no matter how you try to target it, the cancer cells, because they are very dysregulated, will always find a way to continue to succeed or to defeat you. The surrounding cells respond to cues that are predictable. So it's easier somehow to say, I know how the immune system is going to react if I target that immune cells, and somehow realizing that what we call the microenvironment of cancer was going to be potentially more successful than targeting the cancer itself, or potentially combining this type of therapeutics.
Right, and as we age, cancer is obviously more likely. What is sort of a reason for that? I mean, is it perhaps that we outlived what evolution was supposed to be for humans? I mean, why is that the case?
Yeah, okay, so this is a very interesting question. A big focus of my laboratory now is to really understand how this aging contributes to cancer. So aging is the number one risk factor for cancer, right? Most cancer occur after the age of 45. There is, of course, childhood cancer, but I'm not going to talk about the large number of cancer that we deal with, in clinic, occur in older individuals. We are realizing, so again, a misunderstanding. We thought the reason why you do more cancer with age is because your cells in your body accumulate mutation because, exposure to the environment and age, and those mutations make the cells transform, like they are not following the proper rules. A cell is not supposed to expand indefinitely. And this was the understanding, is that you accumulate mutation with age, and at some point the cells become completely dysregulated and cancerous. Now we realize that your immune system, which is the focus of my lab right now, is your immune system is also aging. And that immune system it's often difficult to explain that to people, but the immune system is contributing to cancer growth. The immune system can also help treat cancer, but it also contributes to cancer growth for many, many molecular reasons. And that aged immune system is something I think we can stop because it is much more amenable to therapeutics for a number of reasons. So when we age, what happens is that you are more inflamed. Your cells are accumulating mutation, and this combination of accumulation of mutation and inflammation, which is associated with age, is a recipe for catastrophe and a recipe for cancer growth.
Right. So, in diseases like cancer and during the pandemic, right, you argued that the immune system, it doesn't fail, but it overreacts. How did that sort of discovery come about, and what are the practical implications of that?
Yeah. Okay, so this is also an interesting question because, I was an oncologist and I became an immunologist. And there is something about the immune system. We, in medicine, you are trained based on organs, right? So you are a nephrologist, a cardiologist, or a virologist, and you study COVID. As an immunologist, you realize that the same immune system first populate all your organs. So we think about the immune response or inflammation. Let me define inflammation is an activation of the immune system. When the immune system is activated, it releases inflammatory molecule, and this is what we call inflammation. The public now understand what inflammation means quite well. But so during COVID, the immune system was recognizing this new virus, but it was never exposed to it. So often it overreacts. That reaction was damaging, and in fact, the reasons of deaths due to COVID was absolutely not due to the virus. In fact, people were dying of COVID long after the virus was eliminated from the body. They were dying of excessive inflammatory response to the virus. The immune system, in trying to get rid of the virus, was overreacting and was damaging our lung and destroying the lung. And I studied that extensively in my lab. In fact, we built a very large cohort of patient samples that really helped us understand that overreaction. In cancer, what happened is that the immune system is also recognizing that something is bizarre, right? The cells are being damaged, and it's trying to respond to it. When you are young, that immune system is going to, is going to try, and the cancer somehow defeats that response. Find a way of telling the immune system, well, we are damaged, but please repair us, right? The immune system does that also. Try to repair a tissue. It has many roles. One role is to fight microbes. Another role is to eliminate damaged cells. Another role is to repair the tissue. And the cancer fooled the immune system, telling him, I am not, there's no microbes. I am yourself. Like I am what we call self in in the immune system. It means I am part of your body, try to repair me. And in trying to repair, the immune system is contributing to cancer growth. That, this different state of the immune response is something that now we understand much better thanks to a lot of new technology and thanks to AI, and understanding all these states and being able to really understand how you can potentially target them, either to attack cancer cells and eliminate them as if they were a microbe, or stop the repair, also, but in some cases, I was talking about aging before, in some cases, block that inflammation that can contribute to cancer initiation. This is a lot of information, I realize, but just to explain to you the complexity of what we are thinking about.
And what about macrophages? What's their role?
Okay, so I'm going to talk about macrophage for a minute because this is what I've been studying for 30 years. So macrophages are a very interesting cell type. So the immune system is like an army, right? There's a lot of different what we call cellular compartments, so different group of the army with different roles, right? And their roles converge to the same function, which is get rid of the intruder. We talk a lot about intruders right now. And the macrophages are the most evolutionary conserved immune cells. So a little fly has macrophages, right? So we, as humans, we have a very sophisticated immune system with many, very big army. The Drosophila has one immune cell, and it's the macrophage, right? So in science or in biology, when something is conserved, it means it's necessary, for human life. And in fact, the person who discovered the macrophage was initially a zoologist who wanted to understand principle of life. And he was saying, if I understand what's conserved between the little fly, the horse, the monkey, the rat, the bird, the shark, and the human, then I will understand principle of life. And this is how we discovered macrophages. These macrophages are the cells, we call them sentinels. They are everywhere in your body and are constantly surveying for damage, whether it's what we call an infectious damage, a microbe, or a sterile, something sterile, like, those cells that are aging. And when this macrophage recognize the damage, it starts releasing what we call inflammatory molecule. Those macrophages initially are the first one that detect that there is maybe a cell that is cancerous, right? And that cancer cell, that accumulating mutation, is being recognized by a macrophage. The macrophage accumulate there, and here the macrophage has a very big decision to take. Am I getting rid of these cells, or am I helping these cells repair? And macrophage had these two states, which is an inflammatory state. In COVID, macrophages were causing this big damage that led to death. In cancer, unfortunately, they are fooled by cancer cells and they are helping cancer grow, right? They can also, there's a lot of, throughout our life, the macrophages are also eliminating many cancer cells, but in some cases, they are helping cancer grow. And this is what I'm studying, how those macrophages can be now reprogrammed so that they realize that they are being fooled by the cancer cell and recognize, have the right way of recognizing that this is something that need to get rid of and not repair. That's a big focus of my research.
That's fascinating. So macrophages can either fight the tumors or support them.
That's exactly right.
That's interesting.
Exactly right.
Right. So in terms of the future of cancer therapies, it's less about killing cancer cells and more about re-educating the immune system of these macrophages.
Yeah, exactly. You should join my lab.
No, that's unbelievable. And what's the sort of solution? I mean, obviously there isn't one yet, I guess. But what's the sort of game plan in trying to be able to re-educate those macrophages?
So I need to talk about another immune cell type which has been now successfully targeted by novel immunotherapy, which is the lymphocyte. So there's this branch of macrophage. There's another branch of the immune system, which we call the adaptive immune system, that happens in larger species, which are called lymphocytes. Those lymphocytes are killers. Right? They are not sentinels. They are not the ones that are detecting the damage. Macrophage and their cousin, the dendritic cells, another cell type I study, are going to educate the lymphocytes against cancer. Those lymphocytes are the killer cells. Right? So macrophage can repair, but you're also constantly bringing other immune cells to the site of injury. In 2018, the Nobel Prize of Physiology and Medicine was awarded to two fantastic scientists who were able to also re-educate this lymphocyte, making them killer again. Because macrophage was telling them, don't kill. We are repairing. Don't do anything. This cell is normal, and we are trying to repairing it. We are trying to repair those cells, and it was shutting down somehow this lymphocyte. These two scientists, Honjo and Jim Allison and MD Anderson's Honjo in Japan, identified molecules that were, suppressing those killer function. And by blocking them, which we call now the checkpoint blockade, they were able to, in fact, treat very severe cancer. For example, lung cancer is now being treated by this checkpoint blockade therapy, and many cancer, more than 20 cancer types are benefiting from this checkpoint blockade. But we also realize that these checkpoint blockades are not sufficient, and macrophages continue to suppress through other means. So now the big focus of the field, my laboratory, but many around the world, is to now go to the macrophages themselves and reprogram them, continue potentially to use the checkpoint blockade, but also realizing that macrophages have many other ways of suppressing an immune response. And this is, I think, the big excitement in the field right now.
Right, and these lymphocytes, they're white blood cells, right?
Yes.
What proportion of white blood cells do they make up, percentage-wise?
So so in your blood you have the red, as you said, and the white blood cells, which are composed of lymphocytes. 10% of them are lymphocytes, and then you have monocytes, which are then the precursors of macrophages. Then you have B cells that produce antibodies, for example, and then you have those cells that people know quite a bit, the neutrophils, that are larger group of white blood cells that are usually very good fighters against microbes. The one that we want to mobilize to cure cancer are lymphocyte, monocyte, macrophages. This is the group of white blood cells that we think will be beneficial in cancer therapy.
And more generally, like more broadly speaking, with cancer, if we succeed with sort of expanding human lifespan, does that make cancer more of a problem, or is that potentially going to help?
Okay. This is also an important question, because the term we use now in longevity field is health span, right? So we want people to live longer, but also with less, in better health, right? And not necessarily even longer, we want them to live a good life, right? So we call health span, you live better. So the idea is not to prolong your life and then enable cancer, because you are going to go through this accumulation of mutation that I described earlier. So another big focus of my group is to say, well, we know that you are more susceptible when you live longer to developing cancer. Can we now start to prevent that, right? So in thinking about longevity or health span, what we think is what drive age-associated disease. And now we realize there's a new term in our field, which is called inflammaging, inflammation associated with aging, which is the cause of all age-associated disease. With age, you can have more cancer, you do more cardiovascular events, you have stroke, heart attack, you have cognitive decline, you have this muscle loss that people talk about quite a bit. And all this, we realize, is driven by increased inflammation. The inflammation happens because we have not found a way of stopping the damage. When you age, your organs are more damaged because of the type of exposure we have. What we can potentially modulate or affect is that inflammatory response. We can educate the immune system to tell the immune system, don't respond to the damage, and modulate and dampen inflammation. And we think that by dampening inflammation, but now we are not in therapeutic mode, right? We are in a prevention mode. Here, we are going to dampen that inflammatory response to damage and find a way of reducing the damage, but also reducing that inflammatory response. And by doing so, we think we will prevent cancer, we will prevent cardiovascular events, we will prevent cognitive decline, we will prevent muscle loss. It's a very serious topic for us now. I am leading a very big competition, worldwide competition, on behalf of my school to, in fact, target that what we call inflammaging, that inflammation that occur with age in order to prevent all age-associated disease.
Right, and you founded the Precision Immunology Institute. Do you mind just sharing a bit more on that?
Yeah, so the institute, the premise of the institute is that inflammation influences all human disease. You know, the big paradigm shift in my field, in medicine, I will say, in the recent decades, is that we thought of the immune system as that system that protected us against microbe. And in fact, all departments of immunology in the country were associated with microbiology. So you will study the immune system in the context of response to microbes. Now we realize that we got it completely wrong. In fact, we should study the immune system across all diseases, because each time you have any type of disease, let's say a heart attack, you have this very big inflammatory response to that. Heart attack is death of your muscle cells in the heart. And that inflammatory response is influencing the outcome of your heart attack. When you age, we talked about it, but when you have diabetes, your inflammatory response is also contributing to the outcome. We know all neurodegenerative disease are either driven or influenced by inflammation. So our premise is that inflammation is at the center of medicine. Okay? So we created a group where, we are breaking medical silos. We are not going to think as a nephrologist, a cardiologist, or a rheumatologist. We are going to think about inflammation in general. And all these people are working together to understand all the exact cellular and molecular changes in the immune system in response to the disease of interest. And then bring immunotherapy across medicine. So in my institute, we have leaders of all clinical specialty that come together to bring immunotherapy to the clinic.
Back on the mental side of things, you mentioned stamina.
Yeah.
Being a scientist, thousands of experiments, thousands of hours into each experiment. How do you cope with it when the experiment doesn't work out?
Yeah, so this is where you have to have, I talk about courage. There's an element of courage, right? There is an element also of focus. Right? What is the question that you want to answer, right? And there is tons of uncertainty all the time, right? And also there's an element of competition. There's other groups looking, which is a very nice type of competition, which in fact I encourage always. But there is this sense where things are not progressing, and it's difficult emotionally, right? So you have to understand that you have to have that type of resilience, but resilience motivated by intellectual engagement, right? You have to know where you are going, right? I am convinced, for example, that inflammation is the cause of age-associated disease, and I'm going to fail and fail and fail again in trying to suppress this inflammation. There are some element of conviction that have to drive the scientific process. When you are younger, it's difficult because those type of convictions are you develop them. So it requires strength, right? And often I remember when I started on this path of macrophage, I discovered a new lineage. I was discovering and trying to convince, the community. So there's an element of I have to convince. I was failing in demonstrating, what I wanted to demonstrate to the world, and yet I knew that there is few hypotheses that drive your scientific process, and that needs to be you have to have some sense of clarity in your mind, and that clarity comes from a lot of reading, right? A lot of work that you've done, integrating a lot of knowledge that you've built, going from one model to another is, it should not be gut feeling, right? You have a sense that there is biology. And there is biology by looking at, this idea when I said we were looking at principle of life, what are the cellular compartments that are conserved? you know that this is important. You are going to fail to demonstrate exactly how and why, but there are some principles that are driving, your scientific journey. And this is what I teach. I see, you have to have some type of very strong principle, and this is what keeps you going. And so there is an element of passion on this is important, and that is in you. And in fact, when you make one discovery, even if it's not the biggest discovery on earth, that element of satisfaction, intellectual satisfaction, right, is just extraordinary. You realize that you are making probably the first observation, and you are going to, this is you, right? Like, you've discovered something, and no one can take this from you. You've seen it, you've experienced it. It's extraordinarily addictive, the type of, you are in the unknown, and you are discovering, a new path, and you are going to bring people to that path. I find it's difficult not to feel attached to scientific questions if that question is real, right? Like, and this comes from training. So you have to what I teach is impact and relevance. What is the impact of a potential discovery? What's its relevance, right? And the strength of the question that you are asking. All these are technical things that you teach, and as during your PhD, you learn how to ask real questions. Once the question is solid, I think nothing should stop you, and certainly not the failure.
So have there ever been any moments where you've considered stepping away?
Well, I had a lot of moments of extraordinary discouragement, and I was sad, many times. Stepping away, I suppose. Sometimes I used to say, well, I was a good clinician, and this is such a difficult path, right? Compared to your path in the clinic, which is an easier one because you implement, what people teach you, and you have a lot of satisfaction as a clinician. In fact, you have daily satisfaction because the patients, when the patients smile at you and the family thank you, so you have these daily rewards that you absolutely don't have in science ever. It's never, you never have you're lucky if you have yearly rewards on anything, right? So it's a very different type of emotional strength that you need to have to become a scientist. So the drive is in you, right? You are driving everything. But I suppose if we do that, is innate, right? Like it's can't do anything else. I will never go back to clinical work, pure clinical work. I do a lot of clinical trial because that path of discovery is just extraordinary. It's very difficult to explain it in simple words, but I think artists sense that, right? These artists where, they don't have these daily rewards, but when they've painted something new, they know it, right? And no matter how their peers, respond to it, that you're on the right path. And it's sometimes difficult to articulate it. Often your family, I remember my family saying, but how much more can you work? Like, aren't you tired of... And it's not work, it's absolutely not work. It's really a scientific and intellectual process that is really part of your life, part of who you are. And very difficult to step away from it. It's what defines you.
Right. And what, for the audience, I'm sure they'd want to know, what are the top 3, causes of cancer?
Top 3, well, exposure, so smoking, for example, big cause of cancer. Different type of exposure can be, there's causes that are genetics, there's a lot of genetic mutation that increase your predisposition to cancer. Inflammation is another big cause of cancer, cirrhosis, for example, or strong inflammation. These would be the 3 big causes of cancer: genetic, environmental, and I would say inflammation that can be a consequence of both.
Right. And to wrap things off, let's talk about the future, right? AI, tech, very, very interesting. What is the future of cancer research, and how does AI play? I presume it's going to be regarding this re-education of the macrophages. But
yeah, no, absolutely. And AI is going to transform also our understanding of all these molecular changes. So what happens with AI is, I am so excited about the AI revolution, because one thing I've done in this institute that we described earlier is that we started to also map all these cellular and molecular changes that occur in the cancer lesions, and we started to map it before a lot of groups. We started to map it in patients longitudinally, even during exposure to treatment. So we've built a wealth of data that now we are reanalyzing, using all these AI tools, and we are seeing things much more clearly than even a few years ago, right? So these AI algorithms are now making sense of all this data that we are generating. But the key is to generate the right data sets, right? And the right data set is really, can come only for a very good understanding of the disease, right? So you know what type of data set is required so that you understand the trajectory of the disease, and then you can intervene. So in thinking about macrophages, we spend a lot of time understanding macrophage molecular makeup. So that I can reprogram it from something that was healing and trying to repair, was promoting cancer growth, into in fact someone who will a cell that will stop cancer progression. And that comes from all this AI measurement of all the changes that occur during cancer trajectory.
amazing. If there's one idea I'm taking away from this conversation, it's this. Protection and harm often sit on the same spectrum, and we see that with the macrophages. And whether in science, leadership, or life, the real skill lies in understanding that balance. Miriam, thank you so very much for sharing your thoughts and experiences.
Thank you, Parma.
If you enjoyed this episode, share it with someone who's curious about how the body works. And as always, thank you very much for listening to the Immunology podcast. I'm your host, Arman Varma, and I'll see you in the next one.